At 8:47 p.m., she stared down the barrel of a gun and didn't blink, but the man watching from the corner booth would never be the same. The masked man burst through the Velvet Fig's glass doors like chaos in human form. His hands shook so violently the pistol trembled against the Charleston night air streaming behind him. 37 diners hit the floor or pressed against walls, their expensive meals forgotten as terror took over. Have you ever seen someone refuse to be afraid when they should be terrified? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. But Keisha Williams didn't move. She stood behind the bar, 25 years old and steady as stone, her dark eyes locked on the gunman's face. While others sobbed and begged, she stepped forward. "Hey," she said, her voice cutting through the panic like a blade through silk. "You okay? When was the last time you witnessed real courage? Not the movie kind, but the quiet strength that changes everything." The gunman's mask had slipped, revealing a kid barely old enough to drink. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, landing on the mother, clutching her daughter near table 6. "Don't hurt them," Keisha said, moving closer. Each step deliberate. "Fearless. Whatever you need, we can figure it out." In the corner booth, Logan Whitmore's bourbon glass froze halfway to his lips. He'd been coming to this restaurant every other Thursday for 6 months, always requesting the same seat, always watching the same waitress work her magic on demanding customers. But he'd never seen anything like this. The way she moved toward danger instead of away from it. The way her voice stayed level when everyone else lost control. The way she saw a desperate kid where others saw a monster. "Where's the girl who doesn't get scared?" the gunman asked, his voice cracking. Keisha's eyes narrowed. "What girl?" "The black waitress. The one who never backs down." Something cold crawled up Logan's spine. This wasn't random. Someone had sent this kid looking for her specifically. "That's me," Keisha said without hesitation. "What do you want?" The kid's gun hand dropped slightly. They said you'd help. That you'd understand." Behind the bar, she poured a glass of water and slid it across the mahogany surface. "Seat. Talk." 20 minutes later, the Charleston police led away a 17-year-old named Marcus, whose little sister needed surgery his family couldn't afford. No shots fired. No one hurt. Just a desperate kid who'd been told the fearless waitress at the Velvet Fig might be the only person brave enough to listen. As the last patrol car pulled away, Keisha returned to work like nothing happened. She cleared tables, took orders, smiled at customers who stared at her like she'd just performed miracles instead of basic human decency. Logan watched her sweep broken glass with the same steady hands that had calmed an armed teenager. Her uniform was still pressed, her hair still perfect, her composure unshaken. Most people would need therapy after what just happened. She needed a new water glass for table 3. "More bourbon?" she asked, appearing beside his table with the bottle. Logan looked up into eyes that held depths he'd never noticed before. "How did you know?" "Know what?" "That he wouldn't hurt anyone." Keisha shrugged, refilling his glass. "Hurt people don't want to hurt people. They want someone to see their pain." She walked away before he could respond, leaving Logan staring at the amber liquid and realizing something that terrified him more than any gun ever could. He'd been sitting in this corner booth for months, thinking he was invisible, thinking he was just another customer. But she'd been watching him too. What happens when someone shows you what real strength looks like? When they prove that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right anyway. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone face down danger with nothing but words and compassion? What did that moment teach you about true power? As Logan left the Velvet Fig that night, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. But first, he needed to understand something. The gunman had come looking for her specifically. Someone had sent him. Someone wanted to test Keisha Williams. And Logan Whitmore was going to find out who. He hired the best private investigator in Charleston not to expose her secrets, but to understand why a waitress had more courage than men with armies. Logan's penthouse suite at the Ocean Grand overlooked Charleston Harbor, but he wasn't admiring the view. Spread across his mahogany desk were photographs, documents, and a life story that made his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Keisha Renee Williams. Born in Greenville, South Carolina. Mother killed in a hit-and-run when she was 6. Raised by her grandmother, Viola Williams, in a house that should have been condemned, but somehow held together through prayer and determination. The investigators' report painted a picture of a woman who'd been fighting her entire life. 3 jobs through high school. Full scholarship to Charleston Southern, abandoned after her grandmother's stroke. Bills that never stopped coming. A little brother named Marcus who needed someone to believe in him. Logan studied a photograph of her walking home after a double shift, shoulders straight despite exhaustion, chin up despite circumstances that would have broken most people. Even in surveillance photos, her strength was undeniable. His phone buzzed. "What did you find about the robbery?" he asked without preamble. "That's where it gets interesting." Detective Ray Murphy's voice crackled through the speaker. Murphy owed Logan a favor from a cybersecurity contract 2 years back. The kid, Marcus Thompson, he's not talking. But his cell phone records show calls to a block number 3 weeks before the incident. Logan's jaw tightened. Someone hired him. Gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. Kid asked 3 different people about the fearless waitress at the fancy place. Someone wanted him to find her specifically. The room felt colder. Logan paced to the window, watching boats navigate the harbor below. Any idea who? Working on it. But Logan? This girl you're interested in. She's not just tough. She's smart. Real smart. Graduated valedictorian before she had to quit college. Speaks 3 languages. Volunteers at the community center teaching kids to read. Logan already knew that. What he didn't know was why someone with her intelligence was serving overpriced seafood to people who barely acknowledged her existence. What he didn't know was why her eyes held secrets he couldn't decode. What he didn't know was why watching her had become the best part of his Thursday nights. There's something else, Murphy continued. The grandmother, Viola Williams? She worked for a family in upstate New York back in the 70s. Domestic help. Family moved away suddenly after some kind of scandal. Logan's blood went cold. What family? Still digging. But the timing matches when your father's textile business had those labor disputes. The ones that got buried real quiet. The phone slipped in Logan's grip. His father's business dealings from 40 years ago were legendary for their ruthlessness. Companies destroyed. Lives ruined. Family scattered. Find out everything, Logan said, his voice deadly quiet. And Murphy? Keep this between us. After hanging up, Logan returned to the photographs. There was one of Keisha at her grandmother's grave, flowers in her hand, strength in her posture, even while grieving. Another of her walking her brother to school, her protective stance unmistakable. But it was the last photo that stopped his breath. Keisha behind the velvet fig, taking a cigarette break she probably couldn't afford, staring directly at the camera like she knew someone was watching, like she'd been expecting it. Have you ever been so drawn to someone that you crossed lines you never thought you'd cross? When does interest become obsession? When does protection become possession? Logan's laptop chimed with an encrypted message. Murphy again. Found who's been asking about your waitress. You're not going to like it. Meet tomorrow, noon, Waterfront Park. Come alone. Logan closed the laptop and walked to his bedroom, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he stood at the window, looking toward the part of town where Keisha was probably finishing her closing duties, wiping down tables, counting tips that never added up to enough. Someone had tested her courage and found it unbreakable. Someone had investigated her character and discovered what Logan already knew. She was extraordinary disguised as ordinary. But why? And more importantly, what did they want from her next? Share in the comments. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? That sense of being studied, evaluated, tested? What did you do when you realized you were being hunted? The next morning, Logan woke to find an envelope slipped under his hotel room door. No postmark, no return address, just his name written in handwriting he didn't recognize. Inside was a single photograph. Keisha leaving the velvet fig the night of the robbery, but taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been waiting for her. On the back, someone had written, "She passed the test. Phase 2 begins Thursday." Logan crushed the photo in his fist, but the message was clear. Someone was playing games with Keisha's life. and they just made it personal. The robbery was a job interview she never applied for, and the man who hired her was about to offer her the most dangerous opportunity of her life. Thursday arrived like a storm system, heavy with the kind of tension that makes animals nervous and smart people cautious. Logan sat in his usual corner booth at the Velvet Fig, but tonight everything felt different. The weight of what he knew, the danger he couldn't yet define. The woman moving between tables like she owned the world, unaware that someone wanted to buy her courage. Keisha approached his table with the same professional smile she'd worn for 6 months, but her eyes held something new. Recognition, like she'd been waiting for this conversation as long as he had. "Bourbon neat," she said, setting down as usual without being asked. "Though you look like you need something stronger tonight." Logan's hand paused on the glass. "How do you know what I need?" Same way I knew that kid with the gun was more scared than dangerous. She slid into the seat across from him, breaking protocol for the first time since he'd been coming here. "Same way I know you're not really here for the food." The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation, but their corner felt isolated, charged with electricity that had been building for months. This close, Logan could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength in the set of her shoulders, the challenge in the way she held his stare. "What do you think I'm here for?" he asked. Keisha leaned back, studying him like a puzzle she was finally ready to solve. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. You show up every other Thursday. Always alone. Always watching. You tip exactly 15%. Not generous enough to stand out. Not cheap enough to be memorable. You're hiding in plain sight." Logan's pulse quickened. "Maybe I just like the bourbon. Maybe." She traced the rim of his glass with one finger, and the simple touch sent heat racing through his veins. "Or maybe you're the kind of man who studies people before he decides what he wants from them." The accusation hung between them like a blade. Logan had spent months thinking he was invisible, but she'd been cataloging every detail, reading every signal, seeing through his carefully constructed anonymity. "What if I told you that you're in danger?" he said quietly. Keisha's expression didn't change. "I'd ask you how you know." Logan reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on the table, her leaving the restaurant, taken by someone who'd been watching. Her eyes widened slightly, but her composure never cracked. "Someone's been testing you," he said. "The robbery wasn't random. That kid was sent to see how you'd react under pressure." She picked up the photo, examining it like evidence. "And you know this how?" "Because I've been watching them watch you." The words came out harder than he intended, but there was no taking them back. Keisha set down the photo and leaned forward, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and expensive that didn't match her paycheck. "So you're either my guardian angel or another player in whatever game this is," she said. "Which one should I be betting on?" Logan felt the floor shift beneath him. This wasn't how he planned this conversation. She was supposed to be shocked, grateful, dependent on his protection. Instead, she was interrogating him like a suspect. "Someone powerful is manipulating situations to test exceptional people," he said. "I don't know why, but I know you're on their list. And I know that whatever they want, it's not something you can handle alone." Keisha was quiet for a long moment, processing information like she'd been expecting this conversation her entire life. When she spoke, her voice was steady as a surgeon's hand. "What makes you think I can handle it?" The question hit him like cold water. Because she was a waitress living paycheck to paycheck? Because she was a woman alone in a world full of dangerous men? Because she needed saving, and he needed to be the one to save her? "I don't," he admitted, "but I can't watch someone hurt you for sport." Something shifted in her expression, then surprise, maybe, or recognition of something genuine in his voice. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, and the touch burned like electricity. "What's your name?" she asked. "Your real name." "Logan Whitmore." Her fingers tightened on his, and he saw the moment she connected the name to the fortune, to the power, to the kind of man who could afford to play games with people's lives. "The tech guy," she said. "Silicon Valley royalty. What's a billionaire doing in my corner of Charleston?" Have you ever had someone see through all your walls at once? When someone refuses to be impressed by what impresses everyone else? How do you handle it when the person you're trying to protect turns out to be stronger than you thought possible? That's complicated, Logan said. Keisha smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made her devastating instead of just beautiful. I like complicated. She stood, smoothing her uniform. My shift ends at 11. If you want to explain why someone's hunting me and why you care, meet me at Waterfront Park, South End by the fountains. She started to walk away, then turned back. And Logan, next time you want to have me investigated, try asking me directly. I'm much more interesting than whatever your detective found. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Logan staring at his bourbon and realizing two things simultaneously. Keisha Williams was the most dangerous woman he'd ever met, and he was already falling for her. Tell me in the comments. When someone sees through your carefully constructed walls, is that terrifying or thrilling? Have you ever met someone who refused to be rescued? At 11:15 p.m., Logan stood by the fountains wondering if she'd show. At 11:16, he found out she'd been watching him from the shadows for 10 minutes, deciding whether he was worth the risk. At 11:17, she stepped into the light and changed his life forever. She boarded a private jet thinking she was saving herself, but landed in San Francisco about to save him. The Waterfront Park meeting lasted 3 hours and ended with Logan offering her something impossible, a chance to disappear from Charleston until he could neutralize the threat. A job opportunity in San Francisco. Protection disguised as possibility. Keisha had listened to his explanation about shadowy figures testing exceptional people, about her grandmother's connection to his family's past, about the danger that seemed to be closing in around her. She'd asked sharp questions, demanded proof, and finally agreed to one thing. She'd consider his offer. What she hadn't agreed to was falling asleep against his shoulder on a park bench at 2 a.m., exhausted from carrying the weight of other people's expectations for so long that someone offering to share the load felt like a foreign concept. Logan had watched her sleep and made a decision that would either save them both or destroy everything. Now, 72 hours later, Keisha sat in a leather seat worth more than her car, 35,000 feet above Georgia, trying to process how her life had changed so completely. The private jet felt like a movie set, all polished wood and soft lighting, but Logan sat across from her looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "You could have warned me about this," she said, gesturing at the luxury surrounding them. "Would you have come?" "Probably not." She accepted champagne from a flight attendant, a blonde woman who called Logan Mr. Whitmore, with the kind of respect reserved for people who own jets instead of flying in them. "This is your plane?" "One of them." Keisha nearly choked on her champagne. "How many planes does one person need?" "Apparently more than I thought, since I'm always traveling to places I never planned to go." He was looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, his dark eyes intense in the cabin's soft light. "Are you nervous?" "Should I be?" Logan leaned forward, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I'm taking you to a world where people will judge you before you speak, where they'll assume things about who you are and why you're there. Where being with me will make you a target for speculation and gossip." "Sound familiar?" Keisha said dryly. "Except usually I'm serving drinks to those people instead of flying with them." Something flickered across Logan's face. Anger, maybe at the casual cruelty she'd normalized, or recognition of the courage it took to navigate spaces where you weren't wanted every single day. "It's different when you're with me," he said quietly. "Everything gets amplified, scrutinized." The jet hit turbulence, and Logan's hand shot out instinctively to steady her champagne glass. His fingers brushed hers, and the touch sent heat racing up her arm. For 6 months, she'd watched him from across restaurant tables, studying the way he moved, the way he thought before he spoke, the careful control he maintained over everything around him. But this close, she could see cracks in his composure. The way his jaw tightened when he was nervous. The way his eyes darkened when he looked at her. The way he'd been fighting attraction just as hard as she had. "What exactly are we doing here, Logan?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "I told you. There's a foundation opportunity." "No." She set down her champagne and turned to face him fully. "What are we doing? Because this feels like more than protection. This feels like something else entirely." Logan was quiet for a long moment, and she could practically see him weighing words, calculating risks, trying to maintain the control that seemed so essential to who he was. "I've been coming to your restaurant for 6 months," he said finally. "Every other Thursday. Same booth, same order, telling myself I was just another customer."
But you weren't. No, I was a man who found himself looking forward to Thursday nights for the first time in years, who started planning his travel schedule around a bourbon and a waitress who treated everyone with the same dignity, whether they deserved it or not. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Outside the jet's windows, clouds stretched endlessly, making their conversation feel suspended in space and time. That night with the gun, Logan continued, "When you step toward danger instead of away from it, I realized something that scared the hell out of me. I wasn't just attracted to you. I was inspired by you, and I didn't know what to do with that." Keisha felt her breath catch. "So you had me investigated. So I tried to understand what kind of person walks in a gunfire to save strangers. What kind of strength that takes. What kind of heart." The turbulence hit again, harder this time, and Logan's hand found hers without thinking. Neither of them pulled away. "And what did you find?" she asked. "That you're exactly who I thought you were. And nothing like I expected." His thumb traced across her knuckles, the touch gentle but electric. Strong enough to face down armed teenagers. Brilliant enough to read people like books. Kind enough to see pain instead of danger. Logan. And beautiful enough to make me forget that I'm supposed to be protecting you, not falling for you. The words hit her like lightning. She'd felt the attraction building between them, the tension that made every conversation feel charged with possibility. But hearing him admit it, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her. Have you ever had someone put into words what you were afraid to feel? When attraction becomes something deeper, something that changes the rules of engagement completely. "This is complicated," she said, echoing her words from the restaurant. "I know. You're rich enough to buy small countries. I make tips. I don't care about that. Your family might have been connected to my mother's death." Logan's face went white. "We don't know that for certain. But it's possible." She should pull her hand away, should create distance, should remember all the reasons this was dangerous. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. "So what happens now?" "Now we land in San Francisco, and I introduce you to a room full of people who will never understand what I see when I look at you." "Which is?" Logan's other hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent and sure. "Everything I never knew I was looking for." The kiss was inevitable, had been building since that first Thursday night when she'd refilled his bourbon and he'd looked at her like she was more than just another service worker. Soft at first, tentative, then deeper as 6 months of careful distance collapsed into heat and want and the kind of chemistry that changes everything. When they broke apart, Keisha's heart was racing and Logan looked like a man who'd just stepped off a cliff. "The foundation presentation is tomorrow," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I know. There will be press. Questions about who you are, why you're there. I can handle it." Logan's smile was soft and proud and tinged with worry. "I know you can. That's what scares me." As the jet began its descent into San Francisco, Keisha looked out at the city lights spreading below like scattered diamonds and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. But when she felt Logan's fingers intertwine with hers, solid and warm and sure, she decided some risks were worth taking. Tell me in the comments, when someone sees you not for what you lack, but for what you bring to the table, how does that change you? Have you ever leaped into something knowing it might destroy you? What neither of them knew was that someone in San Francisco had been waiting for this moment. Someone who'd orchestrated the test in Charleston, who'd been watching Logan's growing obsession, who'd counted on exactly this scenario. Someone who needed them both in the same room, at the same time, for reasons that would shatter everything they thought they knew about trust, protection, and love. The plane touched down at 11:47 p.m. Pacific time. By midnight, the trap was already closing. She walked into a ballroom expecting opportunity and found herself center stage in someone else's chess game. The Fairmont San Francisco gleamed like a palace, all marble and gold, the kind of luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money. Keisha stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the hotel's penthouse suite, adjusting the navy blazer Logan's assistant had delivered that morning. It fit perfectly, probably cost more than she made in 3 months, and made her feel like she was wearing someone else's skin. "You ready?" Logan asked from the doorway, and she turned to find him in a charcoal suit that transformed him from the quietly intense man she'd grown to know into someone who commanded boardrooms and bent entire industries to his will. "Define ready," she said, smoothing the blazer one more time. He crossed the room and stood behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders as they both looked in the mirror. "You look like you belong here. I look like I'm playing dress-up." "You look," Logan said, his voice low and sure, "like the most beautiful woman who's ever walked into that ballroom. And like someone who's about to change a lot of minds about what strength looks like." His reflection met hers in the mirror, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. Pride, possession. The kind of heat that had been building between them since Charleston. "Logan, about last night. We'll talk after the presentation," he said, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck that made her breath catch. "Right now, I need you to trust me." Famous last words, she thought, but nodded anyway. The ballroom doors opened at exactly 2 p.m., and Keisha stepped into what felt like another world. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across walls lined with oil paintings worth more than most people's houses. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each one populated by people who moved through privilege like fish through water. And every eye in the room turned to her. Logan's hand found the small of her back, guiding her toward the stage at the front of the room. "Smile," he murmured. "You've got this." But as they approached the podium, Keisha noticed things that made her skin crawl. Cameras positioned at strategic angles. Reporters with press badges she didn't recognize. A setup that felt too elaborate for a simple foundation announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Logan began, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Thank you for joining us today for what I believe will be a transformative moment in philanthropic history." Keisha stood beside him, trying to project confidence while her instinct screamed that something was wrong. The audience looked hungry, expectant, like they were waiting for a show instead of a charity presentation. "6 months ago, I witnessed something extraordinary," Logan continued. "A young woman faced down an armed robber with nothing but courage and compassion. She saw humanity where others saw danger. She chose protection over self-preservation. And she reminded me why I started working in the first place, to find people who make the world better simply by being in it." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Keisha felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. This was wrong. This felt like exposure, not opportunity. Which is why I'm pleased to announce the Keisha Williams Foundation for Crisis Intervention, a $40 million initiative focused on training first responders in de-escalation techniques, with Miss Williams serving as our chief program designer. The room erupted in flashes and questions, and Keisha's blood went cold. $40 million. Her name on a foundation. A position she'd never discussed, never agreed to, never wanted. She'd been set up. Logan turned to her with a smile that looked genuine but felt like betrayal. "Keisha, would you like to say a few words?" The microphone felt like a weapon in her hands. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for her response, waiting to see how the girl from Greenville would handle being thrust into the spotlight without warning. But Keisha Williams had been handling impossible situations her entire life. "This is interesting," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Mr. Whitmore seems to know a lot about what I want and what I've agreed to. Unfortunately, he forgot to ask me about any of it." The room went silent. Camera flashes stopped. Logan's face went white. "I never agreed to have my name on a foundation," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I never agreed to be anyone's poster child for overcoming adversity. And I certainly never agreed to be ambushed in front of cameras to make someone else look philanthropic." She handed the microphone back to Logan and walked off the stage, leaving a ballroom full of San Francisco's elite in shocked silence. But she didn't make it to the exit. "Miss Williams." A reporter blocked her path, camera rolling. Can you comment on your relationship with Mr. Whitmore? Are you romantically involved? Is this a publicity stunt? Another reporter appeared. Were you really involved in an armed robbery? How does it feel to go from waitress to foundation head overnight? The questions came like bullets, invasive and sharp, designed to reduce her complexity to sound bites. Keisha found herself surrounded, trapped by people who saw her as content, not as a person. Logan appeared beside her, his jaw tight with controlled fury. That's enough. Miss Williams has no comment. Actually, Keisha said, her voice deadly calm, I do. She turned to face the cameras, and Logan saw something in her expression that made him take a step back. This wasn't the woman he'd been protecting. This was someone who'd been underestimated her entire life and was done playing other people's games. You want to know how it feels? She asked the cameras. It feels like being used. It feels like having my life turned into someone else's publicity campaign without my consent. It feels like being reduced to a charity case when I've never asked anyone for charity in my life. The room was dead silent now, hanging on her every word. And it feels, she continued, her eyes finding Logan's across the crowd, like discovering that someone you trusted saw you as a project instead of a person. Logan's face crumbled. Keisha, that's not. Isn't it? She stepped closer to him, ignoring the cameras that followed her movement. You had me investigated. You orchestrated this entire scenario. You made decisions about my life without asking what I wanted. I was trying to protect you. From what? Making my own choices. The confrontation played out in front of dozens of cameras, their private pain transformed into public spectacle. Logan reached for her hand, but she stepped back. The foundation is real, he said desperately. The money, the position, the opportunity to make a difference, it's all real. But the choice wasn't. Keisha's voice broke slightly, the first crack in her composure. You took that away from me the moment you decided what was best for my life. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who claimed they were protecting you? When does rescue become control? How do you handle discovering that someone's love came with conditions you never knew existed? She turned to leave, but Logan's voice stopped her. Wait, there's something else you need to know. Keisha turned back, and Logan's expression held something that looked like panic. The person who's been testing you, who orchestrated the robbery in Charleston, they're here. In this room. And this presentation was never about the foundation. The ballroom suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous. Keisha's eyes swept across the crowd, looking for threats she couldn't identify. What are you talking about? Logan's voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. It was bait, to draw them out, to make them reveal themselves. Bait? The word hit her like a physical blow. I'm bait. Before Logan could answer, slow applause echoed from the back of the room. The crowd parted as someone walked toward the stage, a woman in her 70s, elegant and sharp-eyed, moving with the kind of authority that came from decades of controlling outcomes. Beautifully done, the woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Both of you, though I expected nothing less from my son. Logan's face went ashen. Mom. Keisha felt the floor shift beneath her feet as pieces of a puzzle she didn't know she was part of clicked into place. The investigation, the setup, the foundation that felt too convenient. Margaret Whitmore smiled at them both, and it was the coldest thing Keisha had ever seen. Hello, dear, she said to Keisha. We need to talk. About your mother. About the night she died. And about why you've been watching my son for 6 months, thinking you were the only one with secrets. The cameras caught every moment as Keisha's carefully constructed world collapsed around her. Tell me in the comments. When you discover that everyone has been playing a game you didn't know existed, how do you find your footing again? Have you ever learned that your entire reality was built on someone else's lies? In a ballroom full of San Francisco's elite, with cameras rolling and reporters taking notes, Keisha Williams realized that she wasn't the only one who'd been living a lie. She was just the only one who'd been honest about it. The real game was about to begin. He thought he was her savior, until she revealed she'd been protecting him all along. The hotel suite felt like a cage 40 floors above San Francisco, all floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture that couldn't soften the sharp edges of betrayal. Keisha stood with her back to Logan, staring out at the city lights, still wearing the navy blazer that had made her feel powerful 3 hours ago, and now felt like a costume she couldn't wait to shed. "My mother knew your grandmother," Margaret Whitmore said from the leather chair where she positioned herself like a queen holding court. "Viola Williams. Lovely woman. Terrible what happened to her daughter." Logan paced behind the couch, his controlled facade cracking with every word his mother spoke. "How long have you known?" "Known what, darling? That you've been obsessed with a waitress for months? That you hired investigators to dig in her past? That you fell in love with someone whose family has every reason to destroy ours?" Keisha turned from the window, her dark eyes blazing. "My family doesn't destroy people. That's your specialty." Margaret smiled. It was all teeth and no warmth. "Oh, my dear, you have no idea what your family is capable of." "Enough." Logan's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever test this is, it ends now." "Game?" Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "This isn't a game, Logan. This is damage control. Do you have any idea what this girl could cost us?" Keisha stepped forward, and Logan saw something in her movement that made his breath catch. Not fear, not shock, something else entirely. "Tell him," Margaret said, her eyes locked on Keisha's face. "Tell him why you really took that job at the Velvet Fig. Tell him why you've been watching him every Thursday night for 6 months." The silence stretched between them like a wire ready to snap. Logan looked from his mother to Keisha, seeing pieces of a puzzle he'd never known existed. "Keisha," his voice was barely a whisper. She turned to face him fully, and Logan saw the exact moment she decided to stop pretending. "The car that killed my mother," she said, her voice steady as steel, had a license plate registered to Whitmore Industries. 1987, October 15th. Rain was coming down, so hard the witnesses could barely see, but they remembered that plate because it was personalized. Winner 1. Logan felt the world tilt sideways. "That's impossible." "Your father's car," Margaret said calmly. "Though he wasn't driving it that night." "Who was?" Keisha's question cut through the air like a knife. Margaret's smile never wavered. "Someone who had very good reasons for wanting Viola Williams's daughter to stop asking questions about textile factory working conditions. Someone who thought a tragedy might convince her to take her little girl and disappear quietly." The room went dead silent except for the hum of city traffic 40 floors below. Logan stared at his mother like she was a stranger, which, he was beginning to realize, she might have been all along. "You had her killed," he said, his voice hollow. "I had a problem solved. There's a difference." Logan's hands clenched into fists. "She was 6 years old. Keisha was 6 years old when you orphaned her. And look how strong it made her." Margaret's eyes never left Keisha's face. "Strong enough to spend 18 years planning revenge. Smart enough to get hired at your favorite restaurant. Patient enough to wait for you to fall in love with her before she destroyed you." Keisha laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut. "You think this is about revenge? Isn't it?" "No." Keisha moved closer to Logan, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never noticed before. Not hidden pain, not carefully controlled anger. Protection. "This is about justice." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small recording device, the kind that looked like a pen but captured every word. "This is about getting you to confess to murder on tape." Margaret's composure cracked for the first time. "You little." "Careful," Keisha warned. "That's being recorded too." Logan stared at the woman he thought he'd been saving and realized she'd been saving him instead. From his own family. From his own ignorance. From a legacy of cruelty he'd never known existed. "How long?" he asked. "How long have I known who you were?" "Since the first Thursday you walked into the Velvet Fig." "How long have I been recording your mother's people when they came to threaten me?" 3 months. "How long have I been falling in love with you despite everything your family took from mine?" She looked at him then, and Logan saw the truth written across her face like a map of everything he'd been too blind to see. "Since the night you stayed after the robbery and asked me how I knew that kid wouldn't hurt anyone. Since you looked at me like I was someone worth knowing instead of someone worth using." Margaret stood, her elegant facade slipping to reveal something cold and dangerous underneath. "This recording won't hold up in court. No chain of custody. No corroboración." "You're right," Keisha said. but it doesn't need to hold up in court. She pressed another button on the device, and Margaret's voice filled the room, clear and damning. I had a problem solved. There's a difference. Live stream, Keisha explained, holding up her phone. 47,000 viewers and counting. Amazing how fast things go viral these days. Logan watched his mother's face go white as her confession spread across social media in real time. But he was looking at Keisha, seeing her clearly for the first time since he'd walked into that restaurant. You played me, he said. I investigated you. Same thing you did to me. I was trying to protect you. I was trying to protect you too. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the unshed tears she was fighting. From finding out that your family are killers. From learning that your fortune was built on blood. From having to choose between love and justice. Logan felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart. Something deeper. The foundation of everything he believed about himself, about his family, about the woman standing in front of him. What happens now, he asked. Before Keisha could answer, Margaret moved toward the door. Security will be here in 3 minutes. The recording will be dismissed as deepfake technology, and this little girl will disappear just like her mother did. But Keisha was already moving, faster than Logan had ever seen her move. She had Margaret's wrist twisted behind her back before the older woman could reach the door handle. The difference between you and me, Keisha said, her voice deadly calm, is that I know how to fight. You only know how to hire other people to do your fighting for you. Logan stared at them both, his mother pinned against the door by a woman who served bourbon and defused armed robberies with equal skill, and realized he'd been living in a fantasy for 32 years. Let her go, he said quietly. Keisha released Margaret's wrist, but didn't step back. Logan, let her go, please. Margaret straightened her jacket and turned to face them both. Smart boy. Now we can discuss terms. No terms. Logan's voice was harder than Keisha had ever heard it. You confessed to murder on live stream. You threatened someone I love. You turned my life into a lie. I made you rich. You made me complicit. Logan pulled out his phone and dialed 911. SFPD, I need to report a confession to a hit-and-run murder. Yes, I'll hold. Margaret stared at her son like she was seeing him for the first time. You're choosing her over your own family. I'm choosing justice over blood money. As sirens wailed in the distance, Logan looked at Keisha and saw his future. Complicated, dangerous, real in a way that nothing in his carefully controlled life had ever been real. I'm sorry, he said, for everything, for not seeing what was right in front of me, for not trusting you to handle your own battles. Keisha stepped closer, close enough to touch his face. I'm sorry, too, for lying, for using your feelings as a weapon, for making you choose between love and loyalty. Have you ever discovered that the person you thought needed saving was actually the one protecting you? When everything you believed about your life turns out to be a lie, how do you start over? Where does this leave us? Logan asked. Keisha's smile was sad and beautiful and full of possibilities he couldn't yet imagine. I don't know, but for the first time since I was 6 years old, I'm not afraid to find out. Police sirens grew louder as they approached the Fairmont, San Francisco, coming for a woman who'd spent decades believing that money could buy her way out of any consequence. But Margaret Whitmore was about to learn something her son already knew. Some people couldn't be bought, threatened, or broken. Some people fought back. Tell me in the comments. When justice finally comes for people who thought they were untouchable, is it as satisfying as you imagine? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and what's right? Running was the only thing she knew how to do perfectly, until the day silence hurt more than staying. 3 weeks after Margaret Whitmore was arrested for conspiracy and murder, Keisha Williams disappeared. Not dramatically, not with threats or ultimatums or broken dishes thrown against expensive walls. She simply finished her statement to the San Francisco Police Department, declined Logan's offer to fly her home to Charleston, and vanished into a city of nearly 1 million people like smoke dissolving into fog. Logan found her apartment empty, except for a note on the kitchen counter. Some bridges burn when you cross them. Thank you for helping me find justice. Don't look for me. Okay. But Logan Whitmore hadn't built a tech empire by accepting defeat gracefully. He hired the best investigators money could buy. He offered rewards that made hardened private detectives go pale. He called in favors from people who owed him the kind of debts that couldn't be paid in money. Nothing. Keisha Williams had become a ghost, and ghosts, Logan was learning, were harder to find than armed teenagers or corrupt billionaires or justice in a world built on buried secrets. Meanwhile, the story had taken on a life of its own. Hashtag Justice for Keisha trending on Twitter. Think pieces about class, race, and the courage it takes to stand up to generational wealth. A Netflix documentary already in development. Margaret Whitmore's trial scheduled for fall, with media coverage that promised to expose 40 years of corporate cruelty. And through it all, Logan sat in his penthouse office overlooking San Francisco Bay, staring at security footage of Keisha walking away from the Fairmont Hotel and wondering how you apologize to someone who saved your soul by breaking your heart. Sir, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. There's someone here to see you. Says it's about Miss Williams. Logan's pulse jumped. Send them in. But it wasn't Keisha who walked through his office door. It was a kid, maybe 17, with the kind of swagger that came from surviving streets that didn't forgive weakness. You Logan Whitmore? The kid asked, not waiting for permission to sit in the chair across from Logan's desk. Who wants to know? Marcus Thompson. You might remember me from that night at the restaurant, when I pointed a gun at your girl. Logan's hands clenched into fists. Where is she? Marcus laughed, a sound with no humor in it. She's gone, man. Like really gone. You know what she told me before she left? She said loving someone doesn't mean you get to keep them. I need to find her. Why? So you can apologize? So you can explain how you were just trying to protect her? So you can promise it'll be different this time? Each question hit Logan like a physical blow because they were exactly the words he'd been rehearsing for 3 weeks. She doesn't want to be found, Marcus continued. Not by you, not by reporters, not by documentary filmmakers who want to turn her story into content. She wants to disappear. That's not how love works. Love. Marcus leaned forward, his young face hard with wisdom that came from watching people destroy each other in the name of caring. You think this is about love? This is about power, man. About who gets to make decisions and who gets to live with the consequences. Logan stared at this kid who'd been hired to test Keisha's courage and realized he was about to get a lesson in something he'd never learned in business school. She played you, Marcus said. Same way you played her. Difference is, she was honest about it afterward. You're still lying to yourself. I'm not. You hired investigators to dig into her past without asking. You made decisions about her future without consulting her. You put her on a stage in front of cameras without her permission. You used her pain to solve your family problems. Each accusation landed like a punch to Logan's gut because they were all true. And when she turned the tables, Marcus continued, when she showed you that she was smarter and stronger and better at this game than you ever imagined, you got hurt. Like you were the victim in this story. Logan's office felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in as a 17-year-old stripped away every excuse he'd built to justify his actions. What do you want from me? Logan asked. Nothing. I'm here because she asked me to deliver a message. Marcus pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and placed it on Logan's desk. She said to tell you that love isn't about possession. It's about recognition. And she recognized who you really were the first night you stayed after closing to make sure she got to her car safely. Logan's hand shook as he reached for the paper. What does that mean? It means she loved you before she knew your name, before she knew your money, before she knew your family. She loved the man who saw her as a person worth protecting instead of a problem worth solving. The note was short, written in Keisha's careful handwriting. Logan, you were right about one thing. Some people can't be saved because they don't need saving. They need to be seen, respected, and trusted to save themselves. I'm sorry I couldn't teach you the difference. Maybe someday you'll understand that the best way to love someone is to let them choose their own battles. Take care of yourself. Okay. P.S. The foundation is a good idea. Fund it. Run it. But don't name it after me. Name it after people who need opportunities, not monuments. Logan read the note 3 times before the words stopped blurring together. Where did she go? He asked Marcus. Somewhere you can't follow. Somewhere your money can't reach. Somewhere she can figure out who she is when she's not fighting your family's ghosts. Marcus stood to leave, then turned back. You want some advice from someone who's seen what happens when powerful people think they know what's best for everyone else. Logan nodded, not trusting his voice. Stop looking for her. Start looking at yourself. Figure out why you need to be the hero in every story. Figure out why you can't love someone without trying to control their choices. The kid left Logan alone in an office that felt emptier than it had ever felt before. Outside his windows, San Francisco hummed with the kind of life that continued whether hearts were breaking or healing. Logan pulled out his phone and canceled every investigator, every reward, every attempt to track down a woman who'd made it clear she didn't want to be found. But he didn't delete her number, and he didn't stop hoping that someday, when she was ready, she might choose to call. Have you ever loved someone so much that you had to let them go? When protection becomes control, how do you learn the difference? What does it mean to love someone enough to respect their choices, even when those choices break your heart? That night, Logan sat in his penthouse and did something he hadn't done since his father died. He cried. Not for the woman he'd lost, but for the man he'd discovered he'd never really been. Somewhere in a city of millions, Keisha Williams was building a new life from the ashes of everything she'd sacrificed for justice. And for the first time since she was 6 years old, she was doing it entirely on her own terms. Tell me in the comments, when you disappear to find yourself, what do you hope the people who love you will learn while you're gone? Some conversations change your life not because of what's said, but because for the first time, you stop hiding from the truth. 6 months later, Logan Whitmore stood in the rain outside a community center in Oakland, watching through windows as a woman who looked like Keisha but moved with even more confidence taught a room full of teenagers how to de-escalate conflicts without violence. She'd cut her hair short, traded restaurant uniforms for jeans and sweaters, built a life that didn't need his money or his protection or his complicated family history. She looked happy in a way that made his chest tight with something that might have been pride or might have been loss. He'd promised Marcus he'd stop looking for her. He'd kept that promise for 186 days. Today, he was breaking it. Not because he couldn't respect her choices, because he'd finally learned what those choices had cost both of them. The class ended at 4 p.m. Logan waited by his car as teenagers streamed past him, young faces that held the same blend of strength and wariness he'd seen in Keisha's eyes that first night at the Velvet Fig. A few of them recognized him from news coverage of his mother's trial, but most ignored him completely. She was the last one out. Keisha stepped into the Oakland afternoon and stopped dead when she saw him leaning against a Tesla that probably cost more than this community center's annual budget. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she walked over with the same fearless stride she'd used to approach armed gunmen. Logan. Her voice was careful, neutral. How did you find me? I didn't look for you. I looked for where someone like you would go to make a real difference. He gestured toward the community center. Crisis intervention training for kids who can't afford college but need alternatives to violence. It was brilliant. It was exactly what you'd create. She studied his face with eyes that had always seen too much. What do you want? To apologize. Really apologize. Not the kind where I explain my reasons, or ask for forgiveness, or expect anything in return. Logan's hands were shaking, and he shoved them into his coat pockets. The kind where I admit I was wrong about everything. Keisha glanced at the sky, where rain clouds were gathering over the Oakland hills. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down. We can talk there. They walked in silence through streets that felt grittier and more real than the sanitized wealth of San Francisco. Logan had traded his usual suits for jeans and a sweater, but he still looked like money, still moved like someone who'd never had to worry about whether his card would be declined or his rent would clear. The coffee shop was the kind of place where regulars knew each other's names, and the barista offered extra shots for free if you looked like you needed them. Keisha ordered black coffee. Logan asked for the same and left a $20 tip that made the teenager behind the counter stare. Still can't help yourself? Keisha observed, sliding into a booth by the window. Some habits are harder to break than others. They sat across from each other, and Logan realized this was the first time they'd been alone together since that hotel room in San Francisco. Without cameras, without his mother's poison, without the weight of secrets neither of them had been ready to share. "You look good," he said. "Happy. I am happy." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm doing exactly what I want to do, exactly the way I want to do it. The kids love you. The kids need someone who understands that strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway." Logan nodded, recognizing the lesson she'd tried to teach him months ago. "I've been thinking about that night at the restaurant, when you faced down Marcus with nothing but compassion. What about it? I thought you were fearless. But you weren't, were you? You were terrified. You just didn't let fear make your decisions for you." Keisha's expression softened slightly. "Fear is information, not instruction. It tells you what might happen, not what you have to do about it." "I'll let fear make my decisions," Logan said quietly. "Fear of losing you. Fear of not being enough. Fear of admitting that you were stronger than me from the beginning." "Logan, I need to say this." He leaned forward, his voice urgent. "I spent 32 years believing that money could solve any problem, that power meant control, that love meant protection. You showed me I was wrong about all of it." The coffee shop hummed with conversation around them, but their corner felt isolated, charged with the kind of honesty that required courage from both sides. "When you disappeared," Logan continued, "I wanted to find you so badly it felt like drowning. But Marcus made me understand something. I didn't want to find you because I missed you. I wanted to find you because I couldn't handle being the one left behind. And now I miss you because of who you are, not because of what you do to my ego. Now I understand that loving someone means trusting them to know what they need, even when what they need is distance from you." Keisha was quiet for a long time, studying his face like she was reading a map of all the changes 6 months had carved into his features. "My mother's trial starts next month," Logan said. "The prosecution wants you to testify." "I know. They've been in contact." "Will you?" "Yes. Not for you. Not for closure. For every other family your mother destroyed who never got a chance to speak." Logan nodded. "She's going to prison. Even with the best lawyers money can buy, the evidence is overwhelming. The live stream, the recording, 40 years of paper trails that show a pattern of silencing people who got in her way." "How do you feel about that?" The question surprised him. Relieved, ashamed that it took so long, grateful that someone finally held her accountable. He paused. "Proud of you for being brave enough to make it happen." Something shifted in Keisha's expression then, a crack in the careful neutrality she'd maintained since he walked back into her life. "I wasn't brave," she said. "I was angry. For 18 years, I was so angry I could barely breathe sometimes. Angry at the drunk driver who killed my mother. Angry at the system that failed to investigate properly. Angry at the poverty that made my grandmother too afraid to ask questions. What changed? You." The word hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. "The night you stayed after the robbery to make sure I got in my car safely, I realized something. Anger was keeping me alive, but it wasn't letting me live." Logan felt his heart stop. "Keisha, I fell in love with you before I knew your name," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I fell in love with a man who saw a person worth protecting instead of a problem worth solving. I fell in love with someone who looked at me like I mattered. You do matter, more than anything. But that's not why you loved me, was it? You loved me because I needed saving. Because I fit into your hero complex. Because loving someone broken made you feel whole." The accusation hit Logan like cold water. "That's not, isn't it? When I showed you I was stronger than you thought, smarter than you assumed, more capable than you imagined, how did you react?" Logan closed his eyes, remembering his shock when she turned the tables, his hurt when he realized he'd been played, his anger at discovering she didn't need his protection. "I felt betrayed," he admitted. "Like you'd lied to me about who you were." "I never lied about who I was. You just made assumptions about what I needed." The truth sat between them like broken glass, sharp-edged and impossible to ignore. "So where does that leave us?" Logan asked. Keisha finished her coffee and looked out the window, where rain had started falling in earnest. "I don't know, but I know this. If we're going to try again, it has to be as equals. No subject, no victim, no one trying to fix the other person. Just two people who see each other clearly. Just two people who choose each other anyway. Logan reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to offer his own. Would you be willing to try that? To see if we can love each other without trying to change each other? Keisha looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then placed hers in his. The touch was electric, familiar, charged with possibilities neither of them could yet imagine. I'd be willing to try, she said, but slowly, carefully, with complete honesty this time. Complete honesty, Logan agreed. Starting with this, I love you. Not because you need me, because you don't. Not because you're broken, because you're whole. Not because I can save you, because you already saved yourself. Have you ever had to learn the difference between loving someone and needing someone? When you strip away all the roles and games and expectations, what's left? Outside, rain painted the windows of the coffee shop, turning Oakland into watercolor smudges of light and possibility. Inside, two people who'd spent months running from truth finally sat still long enough to find it. Tell me in the comments, what does it mean to love someone as they are instead of as you need them to be? Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship from the ground up? They left the coffee shop holding hands, not as savior and victim, not as pursuer and pursued, but as two people who decided that some risks were worth taking twice. The real work was just beginning. She invited him to her world, not as a visitor, but as a challenge. Prove you want me, not just what I represent. 2 weeks after the coffee shop conversation, Keisha sent Logan a text message that made him stare at his phone for 10 minutes. Dinner. My place. Friday, 7 p.m. Don't bring flowers or wine or anything that costs more than $20. Bring yourself. Her address was in a part of Oakland where his Tesla looked like a neon sign advertising wealth in a neighborhood that had seen too much of how money could be used as a weapon. Logan parked 3 blocks away and walked, passing kids playing basketball in driveways and families gathered on front porches despite the October chill. Keisha's building was a converted Victorian, painted yellow with white trim, divided into apartments that probably rented for more than they were worth, but less than anywhere else in the Bay Area. He found her door on the 2nd floor and knocked, holding a bag from the corner grocery store that contained ingredients for chocolate chip cookies and nothing else. She answered wearing jeans and a sweater that looked soft enough to touch, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger and somehow more dangerous at the same time. $23, Logan said, holding up the grocery bag. I went 2 minutes over budget buying vanilla extract. I'll let it slide this time. She stepped aside to let him in, and Logan entered a space that felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. The apartment was small but filled with light from tall windows that faced west towards San Francisco Bay. Bookshelves lined the walls, packed with everything from philosophy to fiction to policy manuals on crisis intervention. A couch that had seen better days but still looked comfortable sat across from a television that probably came from a thrift store. But it was the walls that stopped Logan's breath. Photographs everywhere, not expensive art, but pictures of people. Kids from her classes, her grandmother's weathered hands. Marcus Thompson in a graduation cap, beaming at the camera. You helped him graduate, Logan said, studying the photo. I helped him see that he was already smart enough. He did the rest. Keisha moved into the kitchen, which was barely large enough for 2 people, but somehow felt spacious. Are you cooking, or am I? Depends. How badly do you want to eat tonight? She laughed, and the sound filled the small space like music. Fair point. I'll cook. You can tell me about the foundation. Logan settled onto a bar stool at her tiny kitchen counter, watching her move around the space with the same efficiency she'd shown at the Velvet Fig. Everything she needed was within arm's reach, organized in a way that spoke of someone who'd learned to make the most of limited resources. The Courage Foundation, he said, accepting a glass of water that tasted better than champagne because she'd handed it to him. Crisis intervention training for first responders, conflict resolution programs for schools, emergency counseling services for communities that can't afford them, and fully funded, operating in 12 cities, helping about 3,000 people a month. Keisha looked up from the stir-fry she was assembling. That's incredible. You should be proud. I am. But it feels incomplete without the person who inspired it. Logan, I'm not asking you to join the foundation. I'm asking if you'd be willing to advise it. Part-time, on your terms, with complete control over your involvement. She was quiet for a moment, focusing on chopping vegetables with the kind of precision that came from years of making minimum wage paychecks stretch to cover maximum size problems. What would that look like? She asked finally. Whatever you want it to look like. Consulting on program development, training curriculum design, field oversight. Logan paused. A chance to take what you're doing here in Oakland and help other people do it everywhere else. Keisha plated the stir-fry and carried both dishes to a table by the window that barely had room for 2 chairs. The food was simple: vegetables, rice, protein that had been seasoned with care instead of expense. But it tasted like the best meal Logan had ever eaten. This is delicious, he said. My grandmother's recipe. She could make anything taste good with the right spices and enough patience. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over a neighborhood that was gentrifying too fast and not fast enough, depending on who was asking. Logan found himself studying Keisha's profile, the way she moved, the quiet contentment that seemed to radiate from her like heat. What are you thinking? She asked, catching him staring. That you're beautiful. That this feels right in a way I didn't know I was looking for. That I want to earn the right to sit at this table with you for as long as you'll have me. Keisha set down her fork and looked at him with eyes that held depths he was still learning to navigate. What does that mean to you? Earning the right. It means showing up. Consistently. Without trying to fix your problems, or solve your challenges, or improve your circumstances unless you ask me to. And if I never ask, then I love you exactly as you are, exactly where you are, exactly how you choose to live your life. She stood and moved to the couch, curling into one corner and patting the cushion beside her. Logan joined her, careful to leave space, careful not to assume permission he hadn't been given. Tell me something true, she said. I've been afraid of you since the first night I saw you, Logan admitted. Not afraid of what you might do to me. Afraid of how much I wanted to deserve you. And now I'm still afraid. But I'm more afraid of missing the chance to find out what we could be if we stopped trying to protect ourselves from each other. Keisha studied his face for a long moment, then reached for his hand. I have a confession. Tell me, that night at the Velvet Fig, when you stayed to make sure I got in my car safely, I almost kissed you. Logan's pulse quickened. Why didn't you? Because I knew it would change everything. And I wasn't ready for everything to change. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and warm that reminded him of vanilla and courage. Are you ready now? For everything to change? For me to kiss you because I want to, not because I need something from you. Not because you're saving me. Not because I'm saving you. Just because I want to see what happens when 2 people who choose each other stop being afraid of what that choice means. Logan's hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. I've been ready for that since the moment I met you. The kiss was nothing like their first one on the airplane. No desperation, no urgency, no weight of secrets pressing against them. This was exploration, recognition, the slow burn of attraction that had been building for months finally allowed to catch fire. When they broke apart, Keisha's eyes were dark with want and something deeper. Stay, she said. Not forever. Not until we figure everything out. Just tonight. Are you sure? I'm sure that I want you here. I'm sure that I trust you to respect whatever boundaries I set. I'm sure that I'm tired of being afraid of wanting things just because they might hurt me. Logan kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. What do you want? I want you to hold me like you see me. Not like you need me. Not like you're saving me. Like you choose me. I do choose you, Logan whispered against her lips. Every day. In every way. For as long as you'll let me. They moved to her bedroom, which was as carefully organized as the rest of her apartment, but felt warmer somehow, more personal. Photographs of her family on the nightstand. Books stacked beside the bed. Windows that looked out over a city full of people trying to build better lives from whatever materials they could find. Keisha turned to face him in the soft light from the bedside lamp. and Logan saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. Not uncertainty, not fear, complete certainty about what she wanted and who she wanted it with. "This time," she said, reaching for the hem of his sweater, "I'm in charge." Logan's hands covered hers, stilling them. "You've always been in charge. I just didn't understand that before." She smiled and pulled his sweater over his head, her fingers tracing the lines of his chest like she was mapping territory that belonged to her. "Show me you understand it now." What followed was tender and fierce and nothing like either of them had experienced before. Not the desperate urgency of people trying to escape their circumstances, but the slow burn of recognition between equals who had finally stopped pretending they didn't want each other exactly as they were. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that smelled like her laundry detergent and possibilities neither of them had dared to name. Logan traced patterns on her bare shoulder, marveling at the way she fit against him like she'd been designed for this exact space. "What are you thinking?" Keisha asked, her voice sleepy and content. "That I've never felt this before." "What?" "Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." She lifted her head to look at him, dark eyes serious. "Logan, I need you to understand something. This doesn't fix us. This doesn't solve the fundamental problems we had before. I know, we still come from different worlds. We still have different relationships with money and power and privilege. I know that too. And if we're going to do this, really do this, we have to figure out how to bridge those differences without losing ourselves." Logan's arm tightened around her. "We'll figure it out. Together. As equals." "As equals," she agreed, settling back against his chest. Outside her bedroom window, Oakland settled into Friday night rhythms. Music from open windows, conversations in languages Logan couldn't identify, the sound of people living lives that mattered even if they weren't documented by news cameras or social media feeds. Have you ever surrendered control and discovered it gave you more power than you'd ever had? When you stop trying to manage outcomes and start trusting the process, what becomes possible? "Keisha." Logan's voice was quiet in the darkness. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing who I could be before I figured out how to be him." She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "Thank you for becoming him." Tell me in the comments, what does it mean to surrender on your own terms? When you take control by giving it up, how does that change the dynamic of a relationship? They fell asleep wrapped around each other. Two people who had finally learned the difference between needing someone and choosing them, between saving someone and seeing them, between loving an idea of a person and loving the complicated, beautiful, impossible reality of who they actually were. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions about how to build something lasting from the ashes of everything they burned down. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged. People say love bridges different worlds, but nobody tells you how terrifying it is to stand in the middle, wondering if the bridge will hold. The charity gala at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art was Logan's idea, but Keisha set the terms. Black tie optional. Half the guest list from her Oakland Community Center. Half from the tech and finance world that wrote checks and expected recognition. Everyone eating the same food, drinking the same wine, participating in the same conversations about justice and opportunity. It was a disaster waiting to happen, which was exactly why Keisha agreed to it. "You sure about this?" Logan asked, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of the hotel suite they'd shared the night before. 3 months of careful rebuilding, and this felt like the first real test of whether what they'd created could survive public scrutiny. "No," Keisha said, fastening diamond earrings Logan had given her. Not as a gift, but as a loan, because she made it clear that accepting expensive jewelry felt too much like being bought. "But I'm sure about us. And if we're going to be together, really together, these worlds have to meet eventually." She wore a dress that had cost more than her monthly rent, paid for with foundation money because Logan had learned that the gesture mattered more than who wrote the check. Midnight blue silk that made her skin glow and her confidence shine brighter than any jewelry ever could. "You look," Logan started, then stopped, shaking his head. "What?" "Like someone who's about to change a lot of minds about what power looks like." The museum buzzed with controlled elegance, champagne flutes, and careful conversations, designer gowns, and political donations disguised as philanthropy. But in the corner near the modern art collection, a cluster of teenagers from Keisha's program stood in ill-fitting rental tuxedos and thrift store dresses, looking like they'd been dropped into an alien world. Keisha moved between both groups with the same grace she'd shown serving tables at the Velvet Fig, but now she was serving something more valuable than bourbon and seafood. She was serving connection, understanding, the radical idea that intelligence and worth weren't determined by bank account balances. Miss Williams, Dr. Patricia Chun, a venture capitalist who donated $500,000 to the foundation, approached with a smile that looked genuine. "I've been following your work in Oakland. Impressive results." "Thank you. Have you met Jamal Harris? He's one of our peer mediators. Just got accepted to UC Berkeley on full scholarship." Keisha pulled forward a young man who'd started the program after his best friend was shot in a conflict that could have been resolved with conversation instead of violence. Logan watched from across the room as she made introductions, creating bridges between people who would never have met otherwise. "She's remarkable," someone said beside him. Logan turned to find Marcus Thompson, now 18 and wearing a suit that actually fit, having grown into the kind of young man who commanded respect instead of demanding it. "She is," Logan agreed. "How are you doing?" "Good. Great, actually." Marcus grinned. "Started community college last month. Criminal justice program. Figure I want to understand the system I'm trying to change." Keisha must be proud. She is. But she's also worried. Marcus's expression grew serious. "About tonight. About mixing these worlds. About whether people like them." He nodded toward the cluster of wealthy donors. "Can see people like us as anything other than charity cases or success stories." Logan followed his gaze to where tech executives and foundation board members mingled with the kind of careful politeness that came from writing checks to solve problems they'd never experienced personally. "What do you think?" Logan asked. "I think some of them get it. Some of them don't. Some of them never will." Marcus paused. "But I think Keisha's right. The only way to change minds is to show people who we really are, not who they think we should be." Across the room, Keisha was deep in conversation with a group that included both sides of the guest list. Oakland kids and Silicon Valley executives, community organizers and venture capitalists, people who'd learned survival skills on streets that didn't forgive weakness, and people who'd learned success strategies in boardrooms that rewarded ruthlessness. "The problem," Keisha was saying, her voice carrying the authority that came from lived experience, "isn't that kids don't know how to resolve conflicts peacefully. It's that peaceful resolution requires hope for the future. When you don't believe tomorrow will be better than today, violence starts looking like the only option." One of the tech executives, a woman Logan recognized from Forbes covers and TED Talks, leaned forward. "So how do we create hope?" "You invest in it," said Carmen Rodriguez, a 17-year-old who'd been kicked out of 3 schools before finding Keisha's program. "Not just money, time, attention, the belief that we're worth more than whatever mistakes we've made." Logan watched the conversation unfold, seeing something he'd never noticed before. The wealthy donors weren't just writing checks to feel good about themselves. They were listening, learning, having their assumptions challenged by teenagers who spoke truth with the kind of clarity that only came from surviving things that should have destroyed them. But he also saw the other side. The way some of his peers looked at the Oakland kids like fascinating specimens instead of fellow human beings. The way certain conversations stopped when Marcus or Carmen joined them. The subtle barriers that money built even when people were trying to tear them down. "Excuse me." A woman in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's cars approached Logan with the kind of smile that preceded invasive questions. "You're Logan Whitmore, right? The one dating the waitress." Logan's jaw tightened. "I am Logan Whitmore, the one in love with Keisha Williams, who runs the most effective crisis intervention program on the West Coast." "Right, of course." The woman's smile faltered slightly. "It's just such an interesting story. Very modern fairy tale." "It's not a fairy tale. It's 2 people who see each other clearly enough to build something real." Before the woman could respond, Keisha appeared at Logan's elbow, having navigated across the room with the kind of perfect timing that came from years of reading social situations for survival. Mrs. Hartford, she said, extending her hand to the woman who'd been dissecting their relationship like a specimen under glass. Thank you for your donation to the foundation. I understand you're interested in educational equity. Logan watched Keisha redirect the conversation with surgical precision, turning what could have been an uncomfortable confrontation into a meaningful discussion about systemic barriers to learning. She didn't defend their relationship or explain their connection. She simply demonstrated her intelligence, her expertise, and her right to be in any room she chose to enter. Later, when the gala was winding down and the last checks had been written, Logan found Keisha on the museum's outdoor terrace, looking out over San Francisco Bay. "How do you think it went?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Better than I expected. Worse than I hoped." She leaned against him, accepting the warmth of his jacket around her shoulders. "Did you see the way some of your friends looked at my kids?"
I saw the way some of your kids challenged assumptions my friends didn't know they had. Same thing, different perspective. Keisha was quiet for a moment, processing the evening. This is what it's going to be like, isn't it? Constantly proving we belong in each other's worlds. Logan turned to face her fully. Is that something you can live with? Is it something you can live with? Having people reduce what we have to a charity case with a happy ending. The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Logan thought about the comments he'd overheard, the assumptions he'd had to correct, the way some people looked at Keisha like she was a project he'd taken on instead of a partner he'd chosen. "I can live with anything," he said finally, "as long as I'm living it with you." Keisha smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her all evening. Even when it's complicated, especially when it's complicated. They stood together on the terrace, looking out over a city that held both their worlds, both their histories, both their hopes for a future that didn't require either of them to be anything other than exactly who they were. Have you ever tried to merge different worlds and discovered that the bridge between them had to be built from scratch every single day? When love requires constant translation, how do you keep from losing yourself in the process? "Logan," Keisha's voice was soft in the night air. "Yeah. Thank you for understanding that I don't need you to defend me. I need you to stand beside me while I defend myself. Thank you for teaching me the difference. Tell me in the comments, what does it mean to bridge different worlds without losing your identity? When you bring together people from opposite backgrounds, what do you hope they'll learn from each other?" As they headed back inside, Logan realized something that made him smile. The evening hadn't been about proving they belonged together. It had been about proving they were strong enough, individually and as a couple, to create space for themselves wherever they wanted to be. Some bridges were worth building, even when you had to construct them one conversation, one connection, one challenged assumption at a time. The real work of merging their worlds was just beginning, but they were ready for it. The warehouse smelled like old concrete and desperation. Margaret Whitmore stood in the shadows, her silver hair pulled back tight, looking nothing like the society photos Logan remembered from childhood. 20 years of guilt had carved lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "You always were too curious for your own good," she said, stepping into the dim light. "Just like your father." Logan felt Keisha's hand find his in the darkness. Even here, even now, her touch steadied him. "Where is he, Mother? Where's Dad?" Margaret laughed, but it sounded hollow in the empty space. "Dead. Has been for 15 years. Car accident," they said. "But we both know better, don't we, Keisha?" The way she said Keisha's name made Logan's blood run cold. Too familiar. Too knowing. "You've been planning this for years," Keisha said, her voice steady as granite. "The restaurant job, the robbery, all of it. Smart girl. I told them you were special." Margaret pulled out her phone, scrolled through something. "Did you know your mother kept a diary? Very detailed. Very incriminating. Have you ever watched someone you love discover their whole life was a lie? The moment when everything they believed about themselves crumbles?" Logan was living that moment, and Margaret wasn't finished. "Your father wasn't just a businessman, Logan. He was a cleaner. Made problems disappear for very wealthy people, including a young black woman who witnessed something she shouldn't have." The warehouse suddenly felt smaller. Logan's chest tightened. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your precious girlfriend's mother died because she saw your father kill a man. And now 20 years later, her daughter is about to pay for her mother's curiosity. Keisha's grip on his hand tightened, but her voice never wavered. You made one mistake, Margaret. You assumed I came to Charleston for revenge. Didn't you? No. Keisha stepped forward, and Logan saw something in her eyes that made him fall in love all over again. Pure, unshakable strength. I came to save your son from becoming you. The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Margaret's composure cracked just slightly. Save him. Logan's been having the dreams, hasn't he? The nightmares about things he never remembered witnessing? The guilt that doesn't make sense? That's trauma, Margaret. Childhood trauma from watching his father do things no kid should see. Logan's world tilted. The dreams. The unexplained anxiety. The way he'd always felt like he was carrying someone else's shame. I've been watching him for 3 years, Keisha continued. Not to hurt him, to understand if he was like his father. If he'd inherited the coldness. If he was dangerous. Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went white. That's impossible. What's impossible? Logan demanded. Keisha smiled for the first time since they'd entered the warehouse. I told you I had people, Logan. Real people. Not hired killers or corrupt cops. People who care about justice. The warehouse doors opened with a bang that echoed like thunder. Federal agents poured in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that turned the space into controlled chaos. Margaret Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and about 15 other charges my colleagues will read to you in a minute. The lead agent was a black woman about Keisha's age, wearing a bulletproof vest like it was designer clothing. She nodded at Keisha. Good work, Agent Johnson. Logan's knees almost gave out. Agent, FBI, Keisha said quietly. Deep cover for 4 years. The restaurant, the robbery, meeting you. It was all part of a larger operation to bring down the network your father built, and your mother continued running. The warehouse spun around him. Nothing was real. Nothing had ever been real. But the way I feel about you, Keisha said, her voice breaking for the first time since he'd known her. That was never part of the job, Logan. That was never supposed to happen. As they led Margaret away in handcuffs, she turned back once. You think you won, but you have no idea what you've started. There are others. There will always be others. Logan watched his mother disappear through the warehouse doors and felt something die inside his chest. The last connection to his family. The last piece of the life he thought he knew. How much it was real, he asked Keisha. She looked at him with tears in her eyes that she refused to let fall. The part where I fell in love with you? That was the realest thing I've ever felt. Everything else. She shrugged. I guess we'll have to figure that out together. Do you think love can survive when it's built on a foundation of lies? Even if the lies were meant to protect? The warehouse was empty now except for Logan and Keisha standing in the dust and the silence, trying to figure out how to build something true from the pieces of something broken. 3 weeks later, Logan sat in a hotel room in Atlanta, watching news coverage of his mother's arrest. The reporters kept using words like crime dynasty and generational corruption. They made it sound like a movie, but movies didn't show you how it felt to lose your entire identity in a single day. Keisha knocked twice, then used the key card he'd given her. She'd been staying in her own room down the hall, giving him space to process everything. But every morning, she brought him coffee and sat in the chair by the window, just being there. You don't have to keep taking care of me, he said without looking away from the TV. I'm not taking care of you. I'm choosing to be here. The difference mattered, and they both knew it. She turned off the TV and sat on the edge of the bed. The FBI wants to debrief you again tomorrow. Just routine stuff about your childhood memories, anything that might help with the other cases. Other cases? Your mother wasn't running this alone, Logan. There's a whole network. People in government, business, law enforcement. It's going to take years to clean up. He looked at her then, really looked. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger without the waitress uniform, but older too. Like the weight of carrying secrets had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. What happens to us? He asked. I don't know. She was quiet for a moment. I testified in front of a grand jury yesterday. About everything. Your father, My mother, the investigation. All of it. Logan's chest tightened. And I'm done. 4 years of living someone else's life, and I'm done. The Bureau offered me a promotion, a transfer to D.C. Big cases, good money, all the things I thought I wanted when I started this job. But I keep thinking about that night at the restaurant, when that man pointed the gun at the mother and her daughter. I wasn't thinking like an FBI agent then. I was just thinking like a person who couldn't let something terrible happen. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city. I've been Keisha the waitress for so long, I forgot who Keisha the person was supposed to be. Have you ever lost yourself so completely in a role that you forgot your real voice? The person you were before life demanded you become someone else? Logan joined her at the window. They stood there not touching, both afraid that contact might break whatever fragile thing was growing between them. I have to go back to Charleston next week, she said. Close up my apartment, say goodbye to my grandmother, figure out what comes next. What do you want to come next? She turned to face him, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she smiled. Really smiled. I want to try being honest. About everything. With everyone. Starting with you. I'm listening. My real name is Keisha Nicole Johnson. I'm 27, not 25. I have a master's degree in criminal justice from Howard University. I've been an FBI agent for 6 years, not just the 4 I spent undercover. I hate seafood, love old movies, and I cry during commercials with puppies in them. Logan felt something loosen in his chest. What else? I've never been in love before. Not real love. Not the kind that makes you want to be a better person. Not the kind that scares you and excites you and makes you feel like you're standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. And I'm terrified that if I jump, you won't be there to catch me. Because why would you trust someone who lied to you about everything? Logan reached for her hand, the same way he had that first night when she'd served him dinner at the restaurant. Her skin was warm, real solid. My turn, he said. My name is Logan Alexander Whitmore. I'm 31 years old. I have more money than I know what to do with. And I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove I'm not my father. I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was trying to protect myself from feeling too much. He paused, studying her face. I've never been in love either. I thought I had been, but it was just comfort. Easy. Safe. What I feel for you isn't safe at all. What do you feel for me? Like I want to rebuild everything. My company, my life, my understanding of what it means to be good in this world. And I want to do it with you. Not because I need you to save me, and not because you need me to save you, but because we're better together than we are apart. Keisha stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. We're going to have to start over, she said. Everything. Dating, trust, learning who we really are outside of all this chaos. I know, it's going to be messy and hard, and people are going to have opinions about us, about this whole situation. I know, and there's no guarantee it'll work. We might be too broken, too complicated. We might not even like each other when all the adrenaline and drama disappears. Logan leaned down until his forehead touched hers. I know, so what do we do? He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might disappear if he held on too tight. We jump, he whispered against her lips, and we figure out the rest as we fall. 6 months later, Keisha stood in the kitchen of a small house in Charleston, making pancakes and listening to Logan argue with someone on the phone about quarterly reports. He was in the living room, pacing like he did when business frustrated him, his voice carrying that edge it got when people try to waste his time. No, Mike, I don't care what the board thinks. We're not investing in private prisons. End of discussion. She smiled despite herself. The Logan she'd fallen in love with was still there, but he'd grown sharper edges over the months. Good edges. The kind that came from knowing who you were and what you stood for. The phone call ended with what sounded like Logan hanging up on someone. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair messy from running his hands through it, tie loosened around his neck. Rough morning, she asked, flipping a pancake with more force than necessary. The board thinks I've lost my mind. Apparently, having actual principles makes me a bad businessman. Maybe you need a new board. Maybe you need new business. He sat at the small kitchen table they'd bought at a thrift store. It was nothing like the expensive furniture from his old life, but it was theirs. What about you? How did the interview go yesterday? Keisha had been interviewing for positions with victim advocacy groups, trying to figure out how to use her law enforcement experience to actually help people instead of just catching the ones who hurt them. It was harder than she'd expected, learning to trust civilians with the truth about what she'd done, who she'd been. They offer me the job, she said, setting a plate of pancakes in front of him. Director of Crisis Intervention for the Women's Shelter. Logan's face lit up. That's incredible. You said yes, right? I said I'd think about it. Why? It's perfect for you. You'd be amazing at it. She sat across from him, pushed her own food around on her plate. Because they offer me something else too. Yesterday, after the interview, Agent Williams called. Logan went very still. Agent Williams was Keisha's former supervisor, the one who'd been trying to convince her to come back to the FBI for months. What did she want? There's a task force, multi-agency thing focused on corruption cases like your mother's network. She wants me to head it up. That's... Logan paused, choosing his words carefully. That's a big opportunity. It is. Keisha looked at him across the table. This man who'd learned to love her without trying to control her choices. It would mean traveling, dangerous work, long hours, months undercover sometimes. What do you want to do? It was the right question. Not what he wanted, not what made sense financially, not what was safer or easier. What did she want? I keep thinking about what you said that night in Atlanta. About wanting to rebuild everything with me. But Logan, I don't think I'm done being the person who catches the bad guys. I think that's who I am, underneath everything else. Logan reached across the table, took her hand. His fingers were steady, warm. Then do that. It means we'd be apart sometimes. It means I'd be in danger sometimes. It means this us, this house, this normal life, it might never be completely normal. Keisha, he squeezed her hand. Do you remember what you said to me in that warehouse? About watching me to see if I was like my father? She nodded. I spent 31 years afraid I'd turn into him. Afraid I'd hurt people, use them, become something cold and calculating. But being with you taught me something I never expected. What? That love isn't about keeping someone safe from who they are. It's about loving them because of who they are. Even the dangerous parts. Maybe especially the dangerous parts. Keisha felt tears building behind her eyes. The good kind, the kind that came from being seen completely and loved anyway. I saw the way some of your kids challenged assumptions my friends didn't know they had. Same thing, different perspective. Keisha was quiet for a moment, processing the evening. This is what it's going to be like, isn't it? Constantly proving we belong in each other's worlds. Logan turned to face her fully. Is that something you can live with? Is it something you can live with? Having people reduce what we have to a charity case with a happy ending. The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Logan thought about the comments he'd overheard, the assumptions he'd had to correct, the way some people looked at Keisha like she was a project he'd taken on instead of a partner he'd chosen. I can live with anything, he said finally, as long as I'm living it with you. Keisha smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her all evening. Even when it's complicated, especially when it's complicated. They stood together on the terrace, looking out over a city that held both their worlds, both their histories, both their hopes for a future that didn't require either of them to be anything other than exactly who they were. Have you ever tried to merge different worlds and discovered that the bridge between them had to be built from scratch every single day? When love requires constant translation, how do you keep from losing yourself in the process? Logan, Keisha's voice was soft in the night air. Yeah. Thank you for understanding that I don't need you to defend me. I need you to stand beside me while I defend myself. Thank you for teaching me the difference. Tell me in the comments. What does it mean to bridge different worlds without losing your identity? When you bring together people from opposite backgrounds, what do you hope they'll learn from each other? As they headed back inside, Logan realized something that made him smile. The evening hadn't been about proving they belonged together. It had been about proving they were strong enough, individually and as a couple, to create space for themselves wherever they wanted to be. Some bridges were worth building. Even when you had to construct them one conversation, one connection, one challenged assumption at a time. The real work of merging their worlds was just beginning, but they were ready for it. The warehouse smelled like old concrete and desperation. Margaret Whitmore stood in the shadows, her silver hair pulled back tight, looking nothing like the society photos Logan remembered from childhood. 20 years of guilt had carved lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "You always were too curious for your own good," she said, stepping into the dim light. "Just like your father." Logan felt Keisha's hand find his in the darkness. Even here, even now, her touch steadied him. "Where is he, Mother? Where's Dad?" Margaret laughed, but it sounded hollow in the empty space. "Dead. Has been for 15 years. Car accident, they said. But we both K."
"You've been planning this for years," Keisha said, her voice steady as granite. "The restaurant job, the robbery, all of it. Smart girl. I told them you were special." Margaret pulled out her phone, scrolled through something. "Did you know your mother kept a diary? Very detailed. Very incriminating. Have you ever watched someone you love discover their whole life was a lie? The moment when everything they believed about themselves crumbles?" Logan was living that moment, and Margaret wasn't finished. "Your father wasn't just a businessman, Logan. He was a cleaner. Made problems disappear for very wealthy people, including a young black woman who witnessed something she shouldn't have." The warehouse suddenly felt smaller. Logan's chest tightened. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your precious girlfriend's mother died because she saw your father kill a man. And now, 20 years later, her daughter is about to pay for her mother's curiosity." Keisha's grip on his hand tightened, but her voice never wavered. "You made one mistake, Margaret. You assumed I came to Charleston for revenge. Didn't you?" "No." Keisha stepped forward, and Logan saw something in her eyes that made him fall in love all over again. Pure, unshakable strength. "I came to save your son from becoming you." The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Margaret's composure cracked just slightly. "Save him. Logan's been having the dreams, hasn't he? The nightmares about things he never remembered witnessing? The guilt that doesn't make sense? That's trauma, Margaret. Childhood trauma from watching his father do things no kid should see." Logan's world tilted. The dreams. The unexplained anxiety. The way he'd always felt like he was carrying someone else's shame. "I've been watching him for 3 years," Keisha continued. "Not to hurt him. To understand if he was like his father. If he'd inherited the coldness. If he was dangerous." Margaret's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went white. "That's impossible." "What's impossible?" Logan demanded. Keisha smiled for the first time since they'd entered the warehouse. "I told you I had people, Logan. Real people. Not hired killers or corrupt cops. People who care about justice." The warehouse doors opened with a bang that echoed like thunder. Federal agents poured in, weapons drawn, shouting commands that turned the space into controlled chaos. "Margaret Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and about 15 other charges my colleagues will read to you in a minute." The lead agent was a black woman about Keisha's age, wearing a bulletproof vest like it was designer clothing. She nodded at Keisha. "Good work, Agent Johnson." Logan's knees almost gave out. "Agent, FBI," Keisha said quietly. "Deep cover for 4 years. The restaurant, the robbery, meeting you, it was all part of a larger operation to bring down the network your father built and your mother continued running." The warehouse spun around him. Nothing was real. Nothing had ever been real. "But the way I feel about you," Keisha said, her voice breaking for the first time since he'd known her. "That was never part of the job, Logan. That was never supposed to happen." As they led Margaret away in handcuffs, she turned back once. "You think you won, but you have no idea what you've started. There are others. There will always be others." Logan watched his mother disappear through the warehouse doors and felt something die inside his chest. The last connection to his family. The last piece of the life he thought he knew. "How much it was real?" he asked Keisha. She looked at him with tears in her eyes that she refused to let fall. "The part where I fell in love with you? That was the realest thing I've ever felt. Everything else?" She shrugged. "I guess we'll have to figure that out together. Do you think love can survive when it's built on a foundation of lies? even if the lies were meant to protect. The warehouse was empty now, except for Logan and Keisha standing in the dust and the silence, trying to figure out how to build something true from the pieces of something broken. 3 weeks later, Logan sat in a hotel room in Atlanta, watching news coverage of his mother's arrest. The reporters kept using words like crime dynasty and generational corruption. They made it sound like a movie, but movies didn't show you how it felt to lose your entire identity in a single day. Keisha knocked twice, then used the key card he'd given her. She'd been staying in her own room down the hall, giving him space to process everything. But every morning, she brought him coffee and sat in the chair by the window, just being there. "You don't have to keep taking care of me," he said without looking away from the TV. "I'm not taking care of you. I'm choosing to be here." The difference mattered, and they both knew it. She turned off the TV and sat on the edge of the bed. "The FBI wants to debrief you again tomorrow. Just routine stuff about your childhood memories, anything that might help with the other cases." "Other cases?" "Your mother wasn't running this alone, Logan. There's a whole network. People in government, business, law enforcement. It's going to take years to clean up." He looked at her then, really looked. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger without the waitress uniform, but older too. Like the weight of carrying secrets had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. "What happens to us?" he asked. "I don't know." She was quiet for a moment. "I testified in front of a grand jury yesterday. About everything. Your father, my mother, the investigation. All of it." Logan's chest tightened. And I'm done. For years of living someone else's life, and I'm done. The Bureau offered me a promotion, a transfer to D.C. Big cases, good money, all the things I thought I wanted when I started this job. But I keep thinking about that night at the restaurant, when that man pointed the gun at the mother and her daughter. I wasn't thinking like an FBI agent then. I was just thinking like a person who couldn't let something terrible happen. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city. "I've been Keisha the waitress for so long. I forgot who Keisha the person was supposed to be. Have you ever lost yourself so completely in a role that you forgot your real voice? The person you were before life demanded you become someone else?" Logan joined her at the window. They stood there not touching, both afraid that contact might break whatever fragile thing was growing between them. "I have to go back to Charleston next week," she said. "Close up my apartment, say goodbye to my grandmother, figure out what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" She turned to face him, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she smiled. Really smiled. "I want to try being honest. About everything. With everyone. Starting with you. I'm listening. My real name is Keisha Nicole Johnson. I'm 27, not 25. I have a master's degree in criminal justice from Howard University. I've been an FBI agent for 6 years, not just the 4 I spent undercover. I hate seafood, love old movies, and I cry during commercials with puppies in them." Logan felt something loosen in his chest. "What else?" "I've never been in love before. Not real love. Not the kind that makes you want to be a better person. Not the kind that scares you and excites you and makes you feel like you're standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. And I'm terrified that if I jump, you won't be there to catch me. Because why would you trust someone who lied to you about everything?" Logan reached for her hand, the same way he had that first night when she'd serve him dinner at the restaurant. Her skin was warm, real solid. "My turn," he said. "My name is Logan Alexander Whitmore. I'm 31 years old. I have more money than I know what to do with. And I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove I'm not my father. I thought I was protecting you, but really I was trying to protect myself from feeling too much." He paused, studying her face. "I've never been in love either. I thought I had been, but it was just comfort. Easy. Safe. What I feel for you isn't safe at all. What do you feel for me? Like I want to rebuild everything. My company, my life, my understanding of what it means to be good in this world. And I want to do it with you. Not because I need you to save me, and not because you need me to save you, but because we're better together than we are apart." Keisha stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "We're going to have to start over," she said. "Everything. Dating, trust, learning who we really are outside of all this chaos. I know, it's going to be messy and hard, and people are going to have opinions about us, about this whole situation. I know, and there's no guarantee it'll work. We might be too broken, too complicated. We might not even like each other when all the adrenaline and drama disappears. Logan leaned down until his forehead touched hers. I know. So what do we do? He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might disappear if he held on too tight. We jump, he whispered against her lips, and we figure out the rest as we fall. 6 months later, Keisha stood in the kitchen of a small house in Charleston, making pancakes and listening to Logan argue with someone on the phone about quarterly reports. He was in the living room, pacing like he did when business frustrated him, his voice carrying that edge it got when people try to waste his time. No, Mike, I don't care what the board thinks. We're not investing in private prisons. End of discussion. She smiled despite herself. The Logan she'd fallen in love with was still there, but he'd grown sharper edges over the months. Good edges. The kind that came from knowing who you were and what you stood for. The phone call ended with what sounded like Logan hanging up on someone. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair messy from running his hands through it, tie loosened around his neck. Rough morning, she asked, flipping a pancake with more force than necessary. The board thinks I've lost my mind. Apparently, having actual principles makes me a bad businessman. Maybe you need a new board. Maybe I need new business. He sat at the small kitchen table they'd bought at a thrift store. It was nothing like the expensive furniture from his old life, but it was theirs. What about you? How did the interview go yesterday? Keisha had been interviewing for positions with victim advocacy groups, trying to figure out how to use her law enforcement experience to actually help people instead of just catching the ones who hurt them. It was harder than she'd expected, learning to trust civilians with the truth about what she'd done, who she'd been. They offer me the job, she said, setting a plate of pancakes in front of him. Director of Crisis Intervention for the Women's Shelter. Logan's face lit up. That's incredible. You said yes, right? I said I'd think about it. Why? It's perfect for you. You'd be amazing at it. She sat across from him, pushed her own food around on her plate. Because they offer me something else too. Yesterday, after the interview, Agent Williams called. Logan went very still. Agent Williams was Keisha's former supervisor, the one who'd been trying to convince her to come back to the FBI for months. What did she want? There's a task force, multi-agency thing focused on corruption cases like your mother's network. She wants me to head it up. That's... Logan paused, choosing his words carefully. That's a big opportunity. It is. Keisha looked at him across the table. This man who'd learned to love her without trying to control her choices. It would mean traveling, dangerous work, long hours, months undercover sometimes. What do you want to do? It was the right question. Not what he wanted, not what made sense financially, not what was safer or easier. What did she want? I keep thinking about what you said that night in Atlanta, about wanting to rebuild everything with me. But Logan, I don't think I'm done being the person who catches the bad guys. I think that's who I am, underneath everything else. Logan reached across the table, took her hand. His fingers were steady, warm. Then do that. It means we'd be apart sometimes. It means I'd be in danger sometimes. It means this house, this normal life, it might never be completely normal. Keisha, he squeezed her hand. Do you remember what you said to me in that warehouse? About watching me to see if I was like my father. She nodded. I spent 31 years afraid I'd turn into him. Afraid I'd hurt people, use them, become something cold and calculating. But being with you taught me something I never expected. What? That love isn't about keeping someone safe from who they are. It's about loving them because of who they are. Even the dangerous parts. Maybe especially the dangerous parts. Keisha felt tears building behind her eyes. The good kind, the kind that came from being seen completely and loved anyway. Webb smiled like a shark. Mr. Whitmore, I've been facilitating profitable relationships between private investors and public projects for 8 years. Never had a single problem, never had a single investigation. The key is discretion and understanding that sometimes the most profitable opportunities require creative financing solutions. That was it. conspiracy, bribery, wire fraud, and probably a dozen other charges Keisha would let the prosecutors figure out. Agent Johnson, we have what we need. Rodriguez's voice crackled in her earpiece. Keisha took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the restaurant. The hostess tried to stop her, but the federal badge got her through quickly. She approached Webb's table with the confidence of someone who'd been waiting 2 years for this moment. Marcus Webb, FBI, you're under arrest. Webb's face went through several emotions very quickly. Confusion, recognition, panic, and finally, resignation. He looked at Logan with something like admiration. I should have known. Too good to be true, right? Nobody gets that rich staying clean. Logan closed his laptop, removed the wire from under his shirt. Actually, you'd be surprised how profitable integrity can be. As they led Webb away in handcuffs, Logan and Keisha stood together in the same restaurant where they'd first seen each other, where a moment of violence had become the beginning of something beautiful. How does it feel? Logan asked. Closing the case? Like justice, she said, but also like a beginning. There are always more Marcus Webbs out there. Good thing there are people like you to catch them. Keisha looked around the restaurant, at the tables where she'd once served people she couldn't imagine knowing, at the corner booth where Logan had watched her with quiet intensity, at the spot near the bar where she protected a mother and daughter from a gunman. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently, under normal circumstances? Logan considered this, then shook his head. No, because normal circumstances wouldn't have shown me who you really are. I fell in love with your courage, your integrity, your refusal to back down from what's right. Those aren't qualities you see at a coffee shop or a dinner party. And I fell in love with your growth, your willingness to be better than your history, your choice to use your privilege to help instead of harm. They walked out of the restaurant together, into the Charleston night that had become their home again. Two people who'd found each other in the middle of chaos and chosen to build something stable and true. There would be more cases, more dangerous work, more nights spent apart while Keisha chased criminals across the country. But there would also be mornings in their kitchen, Sunday afternoons planning their next move, quiet evenings when they could just be Logan and Keisha instead of Agent Johnson and her civilian consultant. The work wasn't finished. It never would be, but they were in it together, and that made all the difference. 5 years after that first night at the Velvet Fig, Keisha stood in front of a mirror in a small chapel in Charleston, adjusting the simple pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's. She wore a cream-colored dress that hugged her curves perfectly. Nothing too fancy, nothing that would make her feel like she was playing someone else's role. Through the chapel window, she could see Logan talking to his best man, Rodriguez from her FBI team. Logan had asked him specifically, saying that the people who'd helped them build their life together deserved to be part of celebrating it. Her grandmother sat in the front pew, crying happy tears and telling anyone who'd listened that she'd known from the beginning that her Keisha was meant for something special. Most of the guests were law enforcement or people from Logan's nonprofit work, the family they'd chosen instead of the one they'd been born into. Agent Williams knocked on the door. You ready for this? I've been ready for this since he kissed me in that hotel room in Atlanta and promised we'd figure everything out together. Any second thoughts? Last chance to run. Keisha laughed. Where would I run to? He'd find me. He's very good with investigations now. The music started, and Williams squeezed her shoulder. Go get him, Agent Johnson. Actually, Keisha said, smoothing her dress, after today, it's Mrs. Whitmore. She walked down the aisle without a father to give her away, because she'd never belonged to anyone else to begin with. She walked toward Logan because she chose to, because they'd built something together worth celebrating, because love wasn't about rescue or salvation, but about two people deciding every day to be better together than they were apart. Logan watched her approach with the same intensity he'd had that first night, but now it was layered with knowledge of who she really was, appreciation for everything she'd survived, and absolute certainty that this was where both of them belonged. When she reached him, he whispered, "You look incredible." "You clean up pretty well yourself," she whispered back. The ceremony was simple, personal, real. They'd written their own vows because traditional promises felt too small for what they'd been through together. "Keisha," Logan said, his voice carrying clearly through the small chapel. I promise to love all of you. The agent, the protector, the woman who faces danger without flinching, and the person who makes pancakes on Sunday mornings. I promise to support your work even when it scares me, to trust your strength even when I want to keep you safe, and to choose us every day even when the world gets complicated. Keisha felt tears she didn't try to hide. Logan, I promise to love the man you chose to become and the person you're still becoming. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and our future. I promise to come home to you after every case, every assignment, every dangerous thing the job requie. When the officiant pronounced them married, Logan kissed her like he had that first time in the hotel room. Soft, careful, amazed that she was real and his and choosing him back. The reception was in the same restaurant where they'd met, transformed with flowers and candles and enough joy to light up the whole street. They danced to old R&B songs, ate cake that Keisha's grandmother had insisted on making herself, and listened to toasts from federal agents who'd learned to appreciate love stories that began with gunfire and ended with justice. Late that night, they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, looking out at Charleston's lights reflecting on the water. Any regrets? Logan asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind. Just one, Keisha said, leaning back against his chest. What's that? I wish my mother could have met you. I think she would have liked the man you became. Logan tightened his arms around her. I think she would have been proud of the woman you became. The one who protected strangers, caught criminals, and somehow found time to fall in love with a complicated rich boy with trust issues. Complicated rich boys are my specialty, apparently. They stood there in comfortable silence. Two people who'd learned that the best love stories weren't about perfect people finding each other, but about imperfect people choosing each other and doing the work to build something worth keeping. Tomorrow there would be more cases, more corruption to expose, more people who needed protection. But tonight was theirs, earned, chosen, and absolutely real. The story that began with violence had become a love story. Not because danger made them romantic, but because they'd chosen to see each other clearly and love what they found. Some fairy tales start with once upon a time. The best ones start with what happens next.